Everyone get your attention, please. I'm Jeff Roberts from Fortune. I'm very pleased to be hosting the last panel in the afternoon, which you have to get through before you can have cocktails on the stock exchange floor, which is pretty cool in my opinion. The good news, we've got fantastic panelists, really smart guys. We're going to be talking about stuff you're interested in money, career, and so on. I'm going to let our panelists introduce ourselves, a few questions, and then we'll turn it over to you. So please take it away, Jeff.
Sure. So Jeff Brown, I'm the CSIRO for BNY Mellon Investment Management. My job is essentially a business-aligned CISO, that actually sits in the business, but also deals with the risk of information security. So it's a very interesting role. I've been in this space for about 20 years now, exclusively in financial institutions. So I'll probably have quite a bit to say tonight.
Hi, I'm Baich. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Wells Fargo. Had the opportunity to do this in the vendor space. So once upon a time, worked for Network Associates, which is now McAfee. Did this in consulting, was a partner at Deloitte. Did this the national security level as a cryptologist in the Navy. And then obviously now doing this as a corporate executive. So I'll try to bring all four of those perspectives to my answers.
Thanks, Rich. Tim McKnight, CISO for Thomson Reuters. I've had a few jobs in my career, but started out with the FBI as a special agent. Went on to be CISO at Northrop Grumman, Fidelity, GE, and now Thomson Reuters. Rich has been following me all along, and here we are. So thanks for having me.
Great. Opportunities in cyber, we usually think of cyber as sort of, threats, all that, but I think there is opportunities for, spending money in the right way or saving money. And you guys get pitched all the time. As a reporter, I get pitched all the time, all these cool vendors. I can't keep track of them all, but if I understand right, you guys are not looking to add 20 new independent vendors, right? So how do you decide how to spend the money? What's a good way to spend it? What's a bad way to spend it?
I'm happy to jump in. So I don't know about the rest of the panel here, but I'm not a retail therapy type person. I do not enjoy wandering the mall for hours upon end. I actually did it recently with my wife, and it was very painful for me. It was about 4 hours at the King of Prussia Mall near our house, which is a tremendous mall, but for me it's very painful. So when I look at obviously this space, which has changed dramatically over the last 5 years, let alone the last 25 years, it's a bit overwhelming, right? I mean, listening to the panel right before us was quite interesting because a lot of us are very much, at least who've been here for a while, there's the people, the process, the technology aspects of this. I don't know that I'm always looking for more technology, to be honest with you. I'm actually regularly looking to do the hiring right, building the strong process and culture in the organization, and then the technology. But I'd say in the last few years, getting those first two right is really critical. Now, with that said, I think with all of the marketplace being so abuzz on cybersecurity, we are seeing some interesting technologies that are filling needs that we have. I'd say some of the suggestions I'd have coming out of GE, where last year we assessed about 120 different startups in the space, whether it was for the Internet of Things and industrial internet, or machine learning, in particular, some of our security work. A couple things, obviously come prepared, and hopefully will come prepared to provide you a way to speed up quickly and work with us in a fast and different way. I think the typical sourcing route of months upon months before you even can walk in the door and pitch us whatever it has is hopefully going away. I think obviously we're looking for scale. The ability to implement quickly and scale fast within our corporations. We are looking for reduction of the technology stack, wherever it may be, across the whole organization. I know I heard that a little bit on the previous panel. I don't think it's a fool's errand. I think obviously many of our responders have 8 to 15 different things they have to look at with respect to what they do every day. So whether it's represented to them in a way that's more 1, 2, or 3 versus 15, we're looking for that speed and that ability to drive down the work effort and really focus on the things that matter more within our environment and less of the commodities type work that we have. So I'll hand it to the other gentleman here.
In addition to what Tim said, and from my particular view, I've been at Wells almost 5 years, and we've implemented over 25 new technologies just in information security, and those organizations really came as a partner, right? So things for you to think about is what problem are you solving, right? Do you understand my environment enough to help me solve a existing problem? Just because you're new and just because you have a good buzzword behind you, whether that be deception, identity and access management, cyber incident response or whatever, trust me, there's 3 or 4 other vendors behind you that have already kind of said similar to the same thing. So really understanding your customer, I think, is really important so that when you do come in, you're coming in to solve the problem. And by the way, if we say we're not interested, we've got that space covered, I will tell you, I've had some incredible stories before. At first, one person actually asked me if I understood security. So you can imagine how that person's career went after that particular comment. So, keep in mind, we have agendas, we have timelines, and although you maybe have a new technology, right, that you're passionate about, it may just not fit into our stack at this point. And don't close the door. Keep the door warm. Right? There's nothing wrong with saying, would you mind if I circle back in 6 months, see if it's changed? No, I appreciate that professionalism. I appreciate the fact that you're not giving up, right? But at the same time, I also know those of you that carry bags, you got to feed your family, right? So go shop somewhere where you have an opportunity. You want to try to develop that relationship with your potential buyers so that you can get your job done, I can get my job done, and together, we might one day do some business together, and that together we both get our jobs done. So, keep that in mind. Also, tremendous, amount of new technology coming into this space from Israel, right? So keep that in mind. It's not just understanding locally, know your competition abroad. And then the last thing is, I know this is a common answer when I say no more agents, and you say, well, mine's really small and it's really slim and it's not gonna. It's more than that. When you're selling to a large enterprise, getting an agent to work on various build standards and technology is a very complex thing. So just keep that in mind. If you're a startup, right, understand you want to get your agent out there, because once you get your agent on somebody's machine, it's very painful for them to get it off. But with the amount of agent technology that's out there, can you ride on somebody else's agent, right? Can you OEM? Can you get into that environment to get that scale that you're looking for? I know that hurts people because they want their agent deployed, but remember, we're an agent-rich environment these days, and there's a lot of room potentially on that agent for sharing from an OEM standpoint. So, keep that as an idea as you move forward.
I would definitely second that. And a lot of what we're doing right now is just rationalizing the technology stack that we already have deployed. There's a lot of tools that kind of get out there over time, and then in some cases they're not really being managed as well as they could be. So the focus isn't necessarily on buying new things, it's on leveraging things that we already have. And then we really start with solving a business problem first. So we're not really just like saying, hey, that's a cool tool, let's go deploy it. We really look at the business case for it. In my area, investment management runs, really tight margins, right? We're in negative interest rates. It's every penny that we spend actually gets scrutinized very closely. And where there's a business case, that's great. But where there's not, we kind of just don't say hey, this is a neat tool, we want to deploy it. We really question these kind of things and make sure that what we're deploying has business value. And then we also ask the question of what new problems is this going to introduce? Because every tool has a new problem that comes along with it, whether it's new alerts that some person has to kind of respond to, whether it's yet another agent on the machines that causes all kinds of troubleshooting headaches. Every tool has a new problem that comes along with it, and we always have to make sure, are we balancing the risk that we're addressing with the benefit that this tool provides, and does that make sense?
And can I highlight, both of them said something really important, which came true to me many times, which is fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve. But the other part of that is communicated to us. I think earlier I heard the Shark Tank group up here. I think there was really one person who really said, this is what we do. And it came out very clear to me as to what they really did, rather than, well, we do this really well, but we're going to do so much more, which always concerns me and troubles me too, because I think that's also the investors pushing a little bit, trying to say, well, are there others you can displace in the market? So I think that's the other thing, is if you can articulate what it is you're really good at and what that specific problem is you're trying to solve, I think you'll really get this group's attention more often than not.
I'm going to ask the flip side of this question. I'm going to ask the harder version first. Not where you guys waste money, because of course, everything's well spent. But where do you see enterprises and financial enterprises wasting money? And just a short answer is fine.
I think wasting money would be not the way I would put it. I would say working harder, not smarter. And I think sometimes when we look at certain partners, products that we have, we're so used to them that we don't want to spend the time and effort to, I don't want to say displace them or replace them. So the way that I would answer that, to give that back to you all, is, remember, I'm not going to buy a product in the next 6 to 12 months that I already haven't looked at. So what you want to know is what am I thinking about displacing in a year or 18 months from now, and help me understand why your solution can help displace maybe one that's already in place or add value to.
Yeah, one thing I've seen across many firms is just not taking the extra time to automate, right? So we have a lot of, especially in the big banks, we have an awful lot of manual processes in place. And there is an opportunity cost there where we're just manually doing things that actually could have a tool with it, and that actually makes sense. So I think for us, that's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both statements, right? I mean, I feel a little dated, but yeah, we're now having to deal with all the technology we put into place over the last 25 years, good or bad. And yeah, I've seen more bad spend in my years than good spend. And I think that's clearly showing in the security space in particular. So, whether that's, utilization of servers, right? I don't know, does anybody have any companies that are really 80, 90% utilizing all their systems out there? No. No, everybody's probably in the 10 to 30% range, and has a lot of work to do over the next 5 years. So I think it's an interesting time for us.
And the flip side, what about a smart investment you've made?
People. I don't know, for me, it's people first, processes second, technology third. So, I have a story where I was pitched a $1 million solution and then a $50,000 solution. We went with the $50,000 solution, and it solved our problem exceedingly well. And it was all because one of our folks was just quite clever and interested in solving the problem. So I think a lot of times, whether you do hackathons in your company, we do them. We did them at GE, we're doing them at Thomson Reuters now, and we're presenting security challenges that we have. And you find out pretty quickly, everybody really is becoming a developer. Developers. It's an interesting time. So I think serving up some of those challenges for the community to, crowdsource and create solutions it's a great time to do that.
I have to agree with Tim. People is probably the number one investment because they're the ones that enable the solutions, but also bring the innovation. I know this may be shocking to everybody out there, but your solution only solves this much of the bigger problem. So oftentimes we have to be the actual system integrator, right, to make your product work with another product, to make with another product. And if you don't have that type of talent, you can buy a cadre of solutions, which is great, but that interconnectivity and that visibility and that transparency that can be brought together through the power of multiple solutions really gives us that proactive and preemptive view.
Yeah, and some of that's really some of the smart investments that we actually make are really not technology related at all. In some cases, we're doing tabletop exercises, we're running training and awareness kind of sessions, and those are really important. I mean, like I've run through table exercises in my career where we realize that the business has no idea how to report a security incident. I don't know if there's a tool out there that can figure that out for us by scanning, but I don't think so. We have to actually sit down with the business and walk through these kind of exercises and get to a point where it's like, okay, we have a major problem. They don't know how to report an incident, so we're never even going to hear about it. So, you know, that kind of investment to me is really well spent.
We heard a lot today about social engineering attacks and phishing. And there seem to be two schools of thought out there. One is, let's train these people. Let's make the staff smarter. Let's, or some people, some vendors are like, no, don't do that. They'll never get it. Just rely on technology. So you got $100 to spend. How much do you allocate to training your staff, and how much do you allocate to the technology stack?
So I have a theory on the half-life of security awareness training and education. It's a very short half-life. Unless you're involved in a violent crime, you don't really change the way you behave. It's hard to change, people and what they do and how they do it. So I would say I tend to be one of those ones who would, if I had the you said $100? Can you give me more?
I'll give you $1 million. I have $1 million.
You have it on you?
Yeah.
So I'm more of the, right now, 60-40, 70-30, in terms of, training internally on our team and making sure, getting them more lean and fast at what they do in orchestration and automation. So,
You know what? I'll take all of it, and I'll say throw all of it over into the human standpoint, but from a different standpoint, right? So, we heard about security awareness, we heard about phishing, but ultimately you're changing a culture. So imagine a culture where you have individuals that are being rewarded for bringing vulnerabilities forward, right? Your own internal bug bounty, right? Or you're being awarded because you were the entity who found a brand new virus, right? I mean, those people that are submitting, all that information, and it ends up being, no other virus institution has identified it. So, if you develop that culture and you drive that culture, it'll make you more secure because of the habits that you're putting in place. But then again, one sour apple can cause a much more severe security incident. So I think it's important. I think it's important to empower people. I'm hoping our government will step up and do a better job. The analogy that I always use, showing, I guess, my age a little bit, but in the 1970s, right, there's this guy called Arnold Schwarzenegger who got our country, up in arms around exercise. We need a program about teaching cyber, right, to elementary school students, middle school, high schoolers, because then when they get to be out there in the workforce, it's a habit and it's no longer awareness. So maybe we all fund our money and get the government to do something, and maybe it'll pay off in 20. Maybe that half-life will move a little bit.
I hope. I know I can address it at home.
Yeah, and to add to that, so I've worked at 2 firms in my career with 300,000 people in over 150 countries. So if you think you're going to train everybody there, that's a pretty tall order. And you get a constant churn too, right? Employees come, employees go, and when are they trained, and does it stick, and is it in the right language? You have 1,000 different issues like that. So I mean, finance is a trust but verify kind of environment. So I think for us, we need to be able to prove as much as we can. Even if it's just proving that everybody at least received training, for us it has to be a split. I mean, training is really important. It is really kind of that last line of defense, but it's extremely important. But so are the tools that can actually help us make sure that people do the right things, and if not, at least where we can kind of detect and react to what happens when they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're always looking for creative ways to amp that up too, right? I mean, that's the challenge, right? I laugh because our senior management tends to constantly think about safety campaigns of the earlier years, and we're trying to look for things that are more experiential in nature or gamify them, going forward so that it has more meaning and more feedback for individuals. But it continues to be a challenge.
And speaking of opportunities, you probably all noticed after WannaCry, all these cyber stocks rose across the board. Probably not deservedly, but it shows people want to put money in the space. If you guys were all going to quit your jobs tomorrow and go become a VC or a hedge fund manager, what part of cyber would you put your money into, like threat suppression or behavioral, or there's pick your buzzword, but where would you invest in?
That's easy for me. Industrial, internet, coming out of GE, the opportunity in the industrial space, in the 20 billion things, important things, not just Fitbits and thermostats, but the things that power the grid and clean your water and all those other wonderful things that we need every day. I think there's huge opportunity in that space over the coming years, and it's here now.
I would step back and say something as simple as just asset management, right? We have a tremendous amount of technologies out there solving lots of problems, but I don't know what degree of assurance organizations have that they truly know what they own, where they own it, the versions. I think WannaCry is a great example, right, of if you didn't know what you had, you set yourself up for disaster. So when I think of the space, I don't really think of a product that jumps out at me that solves that well today to be able to push a button and know your environment.
Yeah, I think for me it'd be more automation. We're starting to get to a point where the attackers are very clever, right? So Tesco Bank's a good example of that. That happened in the UK, where there were about like 9,000 accounts compromised simultaneously over a weekend when the kind of new support staff would be fairly weak, right? So that's the kind of environment we're in now. The only way we're going to really address the skill shortage and the reaction time to when like an event happens, if it's Christmas Eve at 2 a.m., how long does it take us to assemble and respond to that versus, how can we automate some of that response? And we do that in little pockets now, right? Like we have antivirus. When a simple virus gets caught, it has a simple reaction and nobody really needs to get involved in that. But we've never really taken that to the next step, and really made that much more robust.
Earlier, talking with Rich about the future of CISOs and sort of how they've, what's the word, morphed. Once upon a time, it seemed like a terrible job. There's Wall Street Journal articles saying it's the worst job in America. And I remember someone telling me, a CISO saying the problem with being a CISO, it involves telling your boss their baby's ugly because you report to a CIO and the easiest thing to do is fire you. So, but it seems that's evolved, and you guys are all here. So, anyway, so Rich, you want to kick off on that and say where's the profession of being a security professional? How's this emerging? What's next?
Oh, it's kind of funny. The first time I was a CISO was in 2004, 2005, and I wrote a book called Winning as a CISO, and in there I had a section of where this profession would go. And I thought it would go and report to like a CRO or a COO. And part of that reasoning was just because I think this is more risk management than traditional protection, right, when you think of security. Because at the end of the day, if you're connected to the internet, you're at risk. So you're always just managing it. But I think the role is moving, I'll call it, up the food chain as far as where the role needs to sit and the responsibility, because in most large enterprises, information security is being labeled as one of the top risks for the entire company. In a financial institution, you have credit risk, you have market risk, you have all those things. Well, cyber risk now is extremely high. And if you start looking at other industries, it's the same way. If you're a technology company and something bad happens in your product line, it's going to be pretty detrimental. So I think we're going to see this particular role, rise up. I think it's opportunity for CISOs to become more business tuned, right? Demonstrate higher business acumen as well as the traditional technology acumen, and the opportunities to report to the boards, have meetings with your CFO and your CEO are becoming more and more a reality. And you're just not briefing your boss; you are the organization's representative in that particular field.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, just to add to that, maybe the role as I'm seeing it, especially across finance, is starting to actually split because it's just the job's too big for any one person. So what I'm seeing is, things like Goldman Sachs, like recently, they now have 2 CISOs and a chief IT risk officer, right? And they're all kind of working on the same stuff, but at different perspectives of it. And that's going to be a lot more common, I think, in the future. That the role itself, we're starting to look at things like resiliency that have something to do with security, but sometimes it kind of goes into just basic system robustness, right? So then there's people focused on that. Really starting to see a lot more involvement and a lot of extra senior roles, and at the same time, the CISO role kind of taking on, if you look at like let's say DFS, the New York regulations, taking on some personal liability almost there, because they become that person that's like, look, if we're going to stray from this regulation, the CISO needs to personally approve that. Like that one person needs to approve that, put their name on it, and say like, this is okay by me. And if you think that couldn't come back to haunt you at some point, it absolutely could.
Yeah, so I got a counterpoint to that, though. I actually think that is just an absolutely bad thing that if that continues out in the industry. I can't imagine having a title as a CISO and not having accountability, having some co-part maybe in the second line or something else over there. So I hope that doesn't take off. I mean, think about this. How many CFOs do you have? How many CEOs do you have? How many any C-level executives you have? So to see that happen in our industry right now, I think is extremely detrimental from a career standpoint, but more importantly, to actually get work done. So it's kind of like, I actually believe it's suggesting that they don't have any trust in you, because why would they ever split your job? Because you could also say, the CEO job's too big, the CIO job's too big, the CFO job's too big. So I'm being very, very vocal on that particular point, that I think that's a very bad thing for the industry.
And maybe make it a little bit worse, we also have some overlap with things like chief data officer, chief privacy officer, and then operational risk. So, it's a crowded space.
And I'm happy to wager that all of us get more time with the board than probably anybody else in the company in the last 3 to 5 years. So, and at least in the 17 years I've been a CISO in industry, the last 3 to 5 years, for me, it's been within the top 4 at all the companies. So it's a challenge. I mean, obviously they're also looking for folks at the board level, with our skill sets to be there as well. So that's another sign that just like they did CIOs in the past and other CMOs and others.
Do you guys have any tips when talking to a board to get through to them and make them take you seriously?
I think the best tip I ever got was you can't fake authentic. So as you said, don't give it to them. I go back to my FBI days of being prepared for federal court. You better be prepared. You better prep with all the answers. If you don't have the answers, then you'll come back with the answers. And frame it up for them, right? I mean, it's a really challenging space, right? I mean, most of the board are, they're not digital natives at all. It's an intractable problem. They just can't get their arms around it. And, give them a frame of reference. Talk about, where you're headed, how you're going to measure that performance, and be matter of fact as to, where you are and where you need to get to. And they'll ask the standard questions of, well, what does your peer group look like? Are we getting other parties from the externally to give another perspective, experts and others? So I think it's a lot of time and effort.
Assume they've read the materials, and if you've written your materials well, the message is delivered. So the advice is speak less, do more, and listen. And when they ask you a question, answer it simply and directly without a lot of adjectives.
I'll steal a term from last week's CISO Executive Summit in New York, which was relentless preparation. And I think that is what it's about, and both of them touched on that. Just really being prepared, understanding who you're talking to, understanding what kind of information they're going to talk to. Boards are made up of people, right? And each one of them is going to be, I'm a numbers person, I'm a stories person. The more you know about that, and the more you know what kind of questions that those people might ask, and maybe even if you can do a little bit of that offline instead of at the actual board meeting, the more you can do that, the better.
We've got about 9 minutes left. I've got a couple more questions, but I suspect some of you do too. So any hands? You want to ask the gents something?
So what do you see as the role of cyber insurance in your overall risk management strategy? You talked a lot about technology today, but
Sure.
things are negative.
So, insurance is basically just one form of risk management. right? You can mitigate risk, you can transfer risk, you can accept risk, and cyber insurance is just one potential facet that you use in your risk management because you're transferring risk, obviously, to the insurance policy.
Yeah, I agree, and I owe Ty Sagalow a lot of money because for years I professed cyber insurance being a market. This was probably 12 years ago, and he was right. So I'll pay up someday.
Yeah, nothing to really add to that. I think they covered it, but it is absolutely a risk management tool. I think in the past when breaches maybe were a little bit smaller, a lot of the big financials chose to self-insure, right? Because if there's an issue, you buy insurance because you need the extra capital. I think these days, because I came from a firm that actually sold cyber insurance, what they found, that was a great business that was growing by leaps and bounds because as actuarial data was starting to come in, people were realizing we don't have anywhere near enough coverage. We need more. So it's an important tool.
Questions out there? Okay. Well, I got one more. It's just, cyber and threats, a lot of negativity sometimes feels. So a question I always like to ask is, name someone you admire in the profession or just in the security space. It can be a company, it can be a person, just someone you think is just really, you like their approach, you look up to.
I mean, I guess for me, one of the role models, mentors was Howard Schmidt, who passed away recently. So, he was Microsoft, the White House, and many other things. But Howard was the epitome of somebody, a vanguard in this space who really trailblazed for all of us and set a pretty high bar. So kudos out to Howard.
Same thing, respects to Howard, but other than Tim McKnight, I think
which is my second one. So
I think of a guy like Amit Iran, right? Who's been out there primarily in the vendor space, did a short little stint in the government, but you know what you get from Amit. It's nothing sugar-coated. It's straight up. He's a man of his word. I tend to enjoy working with people that I don't have to try to figure them out.
As for me, maybe I like some of the out-of-the-box thinkers in the industry, people like Bruce Schneier, and people that have just been around a long time and are starting to look at things from very different perspectives and start to bring some of the non-IT perspectives to things, because I think we're sometimes a little bit too IT focused.
In the back there, please, and please speak loudly.
What cybersecurity services would you be open to outsourcing and why?
A lot of them. I got to tell you, I have through all my years. I would say I tend to move a lot of my commodity services, so that we can do some of the higher value work and keep that core competency in-house. Whether that's, enterprise vulnerability management, whether that's training, awareness, education. It could even be, first, second tier of security operations. I think I've done it all through all my years. So it all depends. Back to the partner statement, I think partner is key there. The relationship is critical there, and knowing, how that relationship is going to live and breathe and walk and talk is absolutely critical. So I've learned a lot of bad things too in those relationships.
I think it comes down to what you define by that. In general, there are certain jobs, certain skill sets that we're not going to outsource. But I think as things come along, as the cloud and outsource model, right? So I tend to just say it just really depends what you mean by outsource. I think if you can add value, do it in a standpoint that maybe there's business value combined with better risk management, combined with better protection. All that is potentially something to consider. But in general, you can't outsource risk, right, at the end of the day. So regardless if you have a third party or not doing something, ultimately it's going to fall to you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I would almost kind of point to the model of like legal counsel is a good example where we kind of, as a lawyer for a firm, you kind of have your own stable of people, But there's a lot of stuff that you outsource to other people too. And I think that for us, there's kind of two categories. One would be commodity things that are just like, hey, this needs to be a 24/7 function, and there needs to be a lot of people, a lot of eyes on it. We can't hire those people easily or cost effectively. And then there's another category of highly specialized, like forensics is a good example. And it's like, do we hire those people, try to retain them? Are they going to be interested enough to actually stay in a job here? Or do we just kind of like outsource that to a firm where they're always excited about their work and it's a little easier to find and retain?
Great answers. Any other questions, Heather? In the back, sir.
Thank you for the great comments. Could you address specifically whether and how you quantify cyber risk on the board?
Can you repeat that a little louder, please?
Try. Could you address specifically how and whether to quantify cyber risk to the board, the metrics, tools you're using for that?
Yeah, sure. So first off, you have to decide on a framework, right? So if you look at probably, depending on the industry that you're in, you're required to have a framework that maps into the corporate strategy, that maps into the regional, all those different things. So if you've got that framework, you can report and quantify on that. I mean, you can come up with your own weighted coefficients to do all that. So that's one. Secondly, NIST, right? Obviously, NIST is what's been chosen in the financial industry for our regulators and the whole bit, so you might do that. Third, you might have FFIEC guidelines. Fourth, you now may have the ANPR. Fifth, you may have the New York Fed. So if you can see where I'm going with this, it's an absolute nightmare, right? Because you got to go in front of your poor board, who really is trying to understand what you're doing, and it seems like every quarter you have to go in with a new framework, and they're just like, well, wait a minute, you just said last quarter that we were strong there. Yeah, but then they ran the CAT tool, and the CAT tool is binary, and if you just have one thing wrong, they downgrade you. So it's extremely painful right now. So as we're trying to build trust and confidence in the board, we're getting pulled in multiple directions on how we're supposed to do it. But the right way is to come up with something, quantify it, because if you're doing it qualitatively, there's that uncertainty, whereas when you quantify it, it can really help you as far as when they say, why is it taking so long, all right? Or more importantly, why did that drop? And you could demonstrate maybe there's a cyber event or a cyber incident that caused it to drop. But I think that's a very important statement. We can't go in there qualitatively. It has to be quantitatively.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to add. On the operational side, some of the cleaner things would be around the kill chain. You can use, I guess Lockheed or Leidos, I don't know who they are right now, but the kill chain is pretty effective, talking about, attacks, either near misses or successes by attackers. I think it's very successful. I think also I tend to use a pretty basic sort of fire department, time to detect, respond, recover, and where we are operationally in meeting those. It's kind of tactical, but again, it resonates with the board members and then we go through, specific events, actors, things of that nature.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's more, what story are we actually telling, and do the metrics support that? The last thing you want to do is just say, here's a bunch of data, and it's just this overwhelming mess that doesn't really make any sense. So really, it has to be about what story, what point are you trying to get across, and then how can you support that with metrics and numbers?
And to really drive that home, I think the most mature organizations can then go back to the board and say, you've given me this $100 million, and I'm going to spend this in the next year, and this is what's going to happen, right, to that risk, to the scores, right? That's really, really important for to build that trust, that they know you're spending the money in the right areas and you're moving the needle. Because, we can continue asking for more and more money, and if you're not demonstrating risk reduction, that they've got to begin to scratch their heads.
Oh. Well, looks okay. Very quickly, sir.
How do you, having met your compliance metrics, continue to move up towards the number 10 in terms of security preparedness, when you've communicated through your compliance metrics that everything seems okay? So, for example, you may go before the board and they have all the audits that you completed for the year, and you pass these audits, and they walk away with the impression that everything is A-okay. How do you move it past?
So I would basically say if there's an audit team that's out there passing all their information security audits, then someone needs to relook at their audit talent because there's always opportunity to improve. I don't think there's an organization out there right now that can flash green. Secondly, if you're telling your board on a 1 through 10 scale that you're ever going to be a 10, I think they're misleading you, and any board member would lose trust in you. I mean, I think at best, most organizations could strive to be an 8 or a 9. And I mean, 10 is the elusive butterfly. It's probably actually not worth the investment and the money to try to get to a 10. Not to say I don't think you can get to a 10 capability. So those are the things you need to be worried about when you're in front of the board, is giving them that false tense that, for example, compliance does not mean you're more secure.
Right.
Great. We are out of time, but please give a hand to our panelists for what they shared.